Hey, Dragon Slayers. It's been about 4 hours since my last meal, hovering at around 109. So, I'm going to do a series of videos on fasting. And I'm going to share my struggles with fasting and specifically how I overcame them. So, before I start that, or at least the start of this series, I want to talk about how fasting is not different for everyone and it's very different between women and men. So, I linked two articles in the description below, as well as a video from Dr. Mindy, who I think has some of the best fasting advice for women out there, period. So, the first article talks about how does intermittent fasting impact women versus men? It says the gender roles dictated by biology have played a part in shaping male and female metabolic responses to exercise, carbohydrates, sleep deprivation, and yes, you guessed it, fasting. While living in hunter gatherer societies, men and women adapted to periods of plenty and scarcity differently. Men, with their generally larger physical size, responded to fasting with a gigantic boost in metabolic rate. This metabolic boost gave them fuel necessary to hunt. Essentially, men's genetic makeup says, go get food for everyone when they haven't had much to eat. Research reveals that genetic adaptations to periods of scarcity can still be seen in humans today. During short periods of fasting, 12 to 24 hours, men's metabolisms increase up to 14%. Other effects of intermittent fasting on the male body include an increase between 10 and 200% in testosterone utilization and an increase between 100 and 200% in growth hormone and an improvement in blood lipids to support the increased hormonal production and decrease risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Women, however, do not respond to intermittent fasting like men do. In hunter gatherer societies, women's bodies responded to periods of scarcity differently than the bodies of men did. Women's metabolism slowed down to conserve energy and store fat in order to survive a potential long term famine. What this means for women today is that intermittent fasting may not work well for their bodies. There is some evidence that intermittent fasting may not be as beneficial for some women as it is for men. So, that first article goes on to talk about how they basically don't recommend that women intermittent fast. I don't agree with this. I don't agree with the conclusions of either article, but I do think it is great that they do show the differences, right? So the second study talks about one study showed that blood sugar control actually worsened in women after 3 weeks of intermittent fasting, which was not the case in men. There are also many anecdotal stories of women who have experienced changes to their menstrual cycles after starting intermittent fasting. Such shifts occur because female bodies are extremely sensitive to calorie restriction. When calorie intake is low, such as from fasting for too long or too frequently, a small part of the brain called the hypothalamus is affected. This can disrupt the secretion of GnRH, a hormone that helps release two reproductive hormones, LH and FSH. It says when these hormones cannot communicate with the ovaries, you run the risk of irregular periods, infertility, poor bone health, and other health effects. Although there are no comparable human studies, tests in rats have shown that 3 to 6 months of alternate day fasting caused a reduction in ovary size and regular reproductive cycles in females. Irregular reproductive cycles in females. And then they say that for these reasons, women should consider a modified approach to intermittent fasting, such as shorter fasting periods and fewer days. Now, I do agree that women should take some caution when doing intermittent fasting. There are times where it's great and there's times where it's not so great. I think Dr. Mindy does an awesome job of covering this. That's why I linked her video in the description below. She talks about cycles, and there's a great application that she recommends where, depending upon where you are in your menstrual cycle, or even if you don't have a period, Or also if you have an irregular period, she covers all of it. So definitely check it out before, if you're female, and before you start trying to intermittent fast. I think it could be very valuable advice. So that's what I've got for you guys today. Remember that together, you and I will slay the dreaded diabetes dragon.